When America went to war, it was not just a war for soldiers, it was a war for families. Over 16 million Americans, mostly young men, were pulled from their homes, their farms, and their city streets, and sent thousands of miles away to places most had only seen on a map. This created an immense, agonizing void. In a world before email, before video calls, before even affordable long distance, this separation was total and terrifying. The silence that fell over a home when a son or husband left was deafening, a new, constant state of anxiety that would last for years. A young man who had never been more than 50 miles from his home state was now in a foreign land, and his only link to that home was a thin, fragile piece of paper. For the GI, the separation was just as profound. He was ripped from his normal life and thrust into a new, violent, and alien world. He was living in a muddy foxhole or a cramped bunk on a ship, surrounded by strangers from all corners of the country. The single most powerful, humanizing force in his life, the one thing that kept him sane, was the link to home. This link was not a phone call. It was a physical, tangible piece of paper. The mail was not just nice to have. It was a core component of military morale, as vital as food, ammunition, or medicine. A soldier who felt forgotten was a soldier who might lose the will to fight. The letters were an anchor, a proof of identity, a reminder that he was not just government issue, but someone's son, someone's husband, someone's brother. For the soldier on the front, one event dominated his life. It was not battle, it was mail call. This was the single most important, morale-defining moment of his day, his week, or his month. The arrival of the mail clerk, a man hauling a canvas bag, was more important than a general's visit. As the clerk began to shout out names, the entire company would go silent, listening with a desperate, almost religious intensity. A letter from home was a 10-minute escape from the mud, the fear, and the death. It was a physical, tangible piece of home, a reminder of the normal world he was fighting to get back to. A man who got a letter was on top of the world, his spirits soaring. A man who didn't, who heard his name passed over again, was crushed, left to wonder if he had been forgotten, or if the worst had happened and a ship had been sunk. Back home, writing letters became a patriotic daily duty. It was the main job of the millions of mothers, wives, and sweethearts left behind. Every night, at a kitchen table, a woman would sit with a pen and paper and recount the day. She was advised by the government to keep it cheerful. She couldn't write her real fears. She couldn't say, "I'm terrified, I'm lonely, I'm falling apart, and the baby is sick." That would hurt his morale. So she wrote about the mundane. The neighbor's dog had puppies. Billy hit a home run in the school game. I'm saving all my bacon grease for the war effort. This stream of normalcy, this performance of everything is fine, was its own kind of weapon. It was what he was fighting for. As you walked down any American street from 1942 to 1945, you could read the story of the war. You read it in the windows. Families were encouraged to hang small service flags, simple white banners with a red border. In the center of the flag was a single blue star. This star was a quiet but powerful symbol. It meant, someone from this house is serving. 1 star for a son, 2 stars for 2 sons, 3 for 3. This flag, hanging in nearly every window on some blocks, was a public, visual, and unifying sign of shared sacrifice, a constant, silent reminder that the entire neighborhood was in this fight together. It was a map of the community's anxiety and its pride, a way for a mother to silently say to another, "I understand." There was another star, a star that every family prayed they would never have to see. If a serviceman was killed in action, The blue star on the flag was replaced by a gold one, the gold star. This simple piece of cloth became the ultimate symbol of sacrifice. Seeing one in a neighbor's window was a devastating, silent blow that rippled through the entire community. All conversation stopped. People would cross the street, not sure what to say, not wanting to intrude on a grief that was too large. It was a public announcement of a private, unimaginable grief. The act of changing that star was the most feared, heartbreaking ritual of the entire war, a final, terrible duty. But not all communication was good. For the soldier on the front, there was a piece of mail he dreaded, perhaps even more than a letter from the government. It was the Dear John letter. He's been in a foxhole for 30 days, he's surviving on K rations, he's watching his friends die, and his entire reason for surviving is getting back to his girl. Then mail call comes. He gets the letter. He opens it, and the words, "Dearest John, I've met someone else," hit him harder than a piece of shrapnel. This piece of paper, delivered into the middle of a war zone, was a psychological catastrophe. It could destroy a soldier's morale, his will to fight, and his very reason for surviving, more effectively than any enemy propaganda. It was a wound the medics couldn't fix. The most prized mail was not a letter, but a package. This was the ultimate morale booster. A beat-up cardboard box, wrapped in brown paper and string, that smelled like home. It smelled like his mother's kitchen, like his wife's perfume. It was filled with things that felt like pure gold in the middle of the jungle or a frozen forest. Real cigarettes like Lucky Strikes or Camels, not the weeds in the K ration pack. Lifesavers, hard candy, new, dry, clean socks, the greatest luxury on earth, and most importantly, homemade cookies or a fruitcake. By the time they arrived, after weeks on a hot, damp ship, the cookies were almost always just a box of delicious, familiar crumbs. He would share those crumbs with his buddies, and for 5 minutes they weren't soldiers. They were boys, at home. Every letter, both going to the front and coming from it, was read. This was the institutional reality of wartime. A soldier's most intimate private thoughts were read by a stranger. Every GI had to sign a release, and every letter he wrote would be opened and read by an officer in his unit, a man who sat at a small table with a razor blade and a bottle of ink. If a soldier said anything sensitive, like where he was, "We are near a town called Bastogne," what his unit was doing, "We are preparing for a big push," or even if he just complained too much about the food or the officers, bad for morale, the officer would take his razor and cut the words out, leaving a gaping physical hole in the letter. Back home, the same thing was happening, but on an industrial scale. Civilian censors, often women, worked in massive, secret, warehouse-sized offices, like the one in New York City that employed 10,000 people. They read every V-mail and every letter coming in from the front. But they didn't just look for military secrets. They were the morale police. If a husband wrote to his wife about the true, horrific, bloody details of combat, or if he expressed doubt about the war, that letter might be blacked out or lost. Conversely, if a wife wrote to her husband about how hard her life was, how she couldn't handle the kids, or how she was lonely, a censor might black it out, deeming it unhelpful to a soldier's fighting spirit. It was a total, necessary, and intrusive control of information. This censorship created a bizarre new language of vagueness. Soldiers were forbidden from revealing their location. This was the cardinal sin. So, all letters from the front were date-lined with a mysterious, and to the families, maddening location. Somewhere in England, somewhere in the Pacific, somewhere in France. A wife might not know for 6 months what country her husband was in, only that he was, as of the date he wrote the letter, still alive. The soldiers became masters of boring code, which the censors often missed. "I'm getting a nice tan, and there are coconuts," meant he was in the Pacific. "My feet are always wet, and I can hear French," meant he was in a foxhole in Europe. The act of just seeing his handwriting was the entire message. How do you move 50 million letters a month? In 1944, the U.S. Army Postal Service was handling 2.5 billion pieces of mail. This was a logistical nightmare, a war of its own, fought by an army of clerks, sorters, and pilots. This mail, which was just paper, was heavy. It took up precious, irreplaceable cargo space on ships and planes. That space was desperately needed for bullets, for tanks, for gasoline, for blood plasma, and for food. A single, fully loaded B-17 bomber might carry 65,000 letters, but that was space that could have held bombs. The military was faced with a terrible, mathematical choice. A soldier's morale, a bag of letters, was in direct competition with a soldier's ability to fight, a crate of ammunition. How could you deliver both? The answer was a technological marvel, a new system that would change everything. V-mail for victory mail. The idea, based on a British airgraph system and perfected by Kodak, was simple, ingenious, and perfectly suited to the 1940s. What if you didn't ship the letter? What if you shipped a picture of the letter? The system was launched in 1942, accompanied by a massive propaganda campaign. It was a standardized government program. A citizen would write their letter, not on their own stationery, but on a special pre-printed form. This form was both the letter and the envelope, a single sheet of paper that, when folded, was ready to be mailed. This V-mail form was a masterpiece of efficiency. It was a single sheet of paper. The front had a space for the address, to a soldier's APO number, and the stamp. The back had a space for the message. The instructions were clear. Write plainly. Very small writing is not suitable. This was because the letter would eventually be blown up and printed at 1/4 its original size. It was a restriction that forced people to be concise, a new, almost poetic art form of its own. You couldn't ramble. You had to make every word count. It was the 1940s equivalent of a text message, a short, focused burst of love and news. This is the process of the new lifeline. You, the mother in Ohio, would write your letter on this V-mail form. You would fold it, seal it, and mail it. It would arrive at a processing center in a place like New York or San Francisco, where a censor would read it. Then, it would be fed into a large, state-of-the-art Kodak Recordac machine, which would photograph it at high speed, along with 1,500 other letters, onto a single small compact reel of 16mm microfilm. This reel, the size of a hockey puck, was then flown or shipped across the ocean. A single tiny reel of film now held the hopes, fears, and love of an entire battalion. The impact of this system was staggering. The math was a war-winning equation. One single canvas mailbag, which used to hold about 3,000 regular letters, could now hold 150,000 V-mail letters, all on those tiny microfilm reels. The same 150,000 letters, in their original paper form, would have taken 37 mailbags and weighed over 2,500 pounds. This system saved 98% of the cargo space. It was a logistical miracle. It freed up thousands of tons of shipping space for bullets, beans, and bombs, while also increasing the speed and reliability of the mail. V-mail wasn't just a convenience, it was a weapon. This new system also changed the speed of communication. Regular mail had to go by boat. A letter to the Pacific could take 40, 50, or even 60 days, sitting in the hot, damp hold of a cargo ship. It was slow, heavy, and vulnerable to U-boats. A single sinking could wipe out the mail for an entire division. But a V-mail reel was tiny. It was light. It could be flown. A reel of microfilm could be put in the pocket of a pilot flying a transport plane, or even a bomber. This cut the communication time from over a month down to as little as 10 or 12 days. In a war where a soldier's life was a matter of days, this speed was a godsend. When the reel of film arrived at the APO, Army Post Office, overseas, in a tent near the front, it was developed in a chemical bath. Each letter was then individually printed as a small 4 by 5 inch photograph. This is what the soldier received. It was not the original letter. It was a small, black and white photostat, delivered in a small envelope. But it was magic. It was the fastest mail. And most importantly, it was a photograph of your loved one's actual handwriting. In a world of cold, impersonal, typewritten orders, seeing that familiar cursive, that intimate scrawl, was a jolt of pure humanity. It was a piece of home you could hold in your hand. V-mail had another benefit, one that was not advertised. It was much easier for the censors to read. Instead of opening 150,000 individual envelopes, a censor could just sit in a dark room and scroll through the microfilm on a projector screen, reading hundreds of letters in an hour. If a letter had sensitive info, they marked it, and that one letter was simply not printed. It just vanished. This was far more efficient than the old-fashioned, messy and time-consuming process of cutting letters to ribbons with a razor blade. It was a streamlined, industrial process for both mail and censorship. There was another, far less common form of communication: the telegram. A telegram was fast, transmitting in hours. But in the 1940s, a telegram was never good news. You prayed you would not get a telegram. A letter meant life. A knock on the door, a Western Union delivery boy, meant the opposite. This was the dread that every family lived with, every hour of every day. The sound of a bicycle on the sidewalk, the crunch of footsteps on the porch, could make a mother's heart stop. This was the cold, bureaucratic language of death. The telegram. It never came from a friend. It was an official government document. It began with the soul-crushing words, "The Secretary of War deeply regrets to inform you that your son was killed in action." This piece of paper was the most feared object in America. This was the moment a blue star in the window was, heartbreakingly, taken down and replaced with a gold one. This was the communication that severed the lifeline for good. There was another, more communal lifeline: the radio. The Armed Forces Radio Service, AFRS, was a network of radio stations created to broadcast American content to troops, wherever they were. For a GI in the mud of Italy, hearing the voice of Bing Crosby, or a baseball game, or the command performance variety show, was a powerful anchor to sanity. It was a voice from home, a reminder of the world that was still waiting for him. It was a shared experience, listening in a tent with your buddies, that reminded you that you were not just a soldier, you were an American. There was another, darker voice on the airwaves. This was communication from the enemy, a form of psychological warfare. GIs would turn their radio dials and hear the seductive voice of Axis Sally in Europe, or Tokyo Rose in the Pacific. These were propaganda broadcasts. They would play the best American music, and then the voice would say, "Don't you wish you were home, fellas? Your wives and sweethearts are probably cheating on you right now." It was an insidious and sometimes effective attempt to demoralize soldiers by weaponizing their homesickness. The U.S. Army fought back, not just with guns, but with music. They created the V-disc, V for victory. These were 12-inch, 78 RPM records, made just for the military. They were recorded with special new performances from the biggest stars, like Bing Crosby, the Andrews Sisters, and Frank Sinatra, who often recorded messages of support. These records were shipped to the front, where men would play them on a small, hand-cranked phonograph. This V-disc was a piece of home, a sound that drowned out the sound of the war. There was another one-way communication: the newsreel, A mother back home would go to the cinema every week. She would sit through the cartoon and the feature film just to watch the Universal newsreel. She would scan the grainy black and white footage of the war, her heart in her throat, desperately looking for a 1-second glimpse of her son's face, just to get proof that he was, at least a few weeks ago, still alive. The truth of all this communication is that the words were often empty. The censor's pen ensured that. The food is fine. The weather is rainy. Don't worry about me. The families back home wrote about the new garden or the church bake sale. The real communication was unspoken. The simple, profound fact that a letter arrived. That was the message. It meant, I am alive. And the act of sending a letter meant, you are not forgotten. In the vast, terrifying silence of the war, that simple, unspoken, paper and ink bond was everything. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, hit the like button and subscribe for more daily content.